All right, I assume I have it now. So share screen. How can I do this easiest? See how this works. Well, wait, if I do, hold on, slideshow? Is that all you see basically is the presentation?
Yep, looks good.
All right, awesome. Sorry, bear with me. Haven't really hosted Zoom and everything before. Apologize. I'm used to Teams and it works. But we are here for the open close principle. As we all know, it's one of the main solid principles. Taking a slight tangent on it, more focusing in on how I actually go about using it for implementing said new features that product comes to me with. But as we know, open close principle stands for open for extension, closed for modification. And yeah, short, sweet, but what does that really mean? And that's what we're going to dive into. And also, of course, how does this apply to you? At a general high level here, product comes to you and they go, hey, we want this new feature, and of course they want it now or yesterday, or if you have some time, in the future, not this sprint, but in a couple sprints. And you go about and know that you deal with this all the time. You are going to have to A, get it done, but B, extend it in the future. Always, it's the way it happens with anything we code. It's never set in stone. But we just need some sort of basic implementation to get us started, and then we worry about adding enhancements later. But me, I'm Ray Bohartz. I've been doing PHP for 10 plus years now, I would say, professionally. Actually, for the past 2 years with my current company, I've been actually doing Golang as well. My company is a Sluco Healthcare Solutions LLC. We're a payment facilitator for the healthcare industry. We deal with integrations for various EHR systems, such as Epic, Cerner, ones you may or may not have heard of before. But we deal more, system is more of, I consider it more of a SaaS. We deal with multiple providers where the configurations are different for each one, even just how a simple feature works. Just to do a basic search to go look up open patient balances. Depending on the provider, they may have different search configurations. They may allow more leniency for searching on different pieces of data. And that's where, for me, the open closed principle comes in. But just a little bit of history here for those that may or may not be familiar with for the open closed principle. It all started back in about 1998 is with Bertrand Meyer in the Object-Oriented Software Construction book, where he focused in on defining the open-closed principle. Overall, Bertrand at that time, he seemed to be heavily focused in on more of a abstract superclasses and inheriting style, with using the open closed principle until Robert C. Martin came along dealing with the C++ report, who is also heavily noted when it comes to the open closed principle. I wrote an article for the C++ report back in '96. He does reference back to Bertrand Myers and his original definition for it, but he focuses it in more around abstracting and overloading of methods ultimately. But Bertrand, he comes out saying that a module is said to be open if it's available for extension. So in his use case, because he was working with Delphi, was more about, like I was saying, abstraction, having that abstract class or that super class that's doing everything. And then you can extend said class to implement and add new features or properties to it or override said functionality for one of those methods. But at the same time, the closed part of it is a module is said to be closed if it, well, that's actually what I just said. It's closed if it's available to use by other modules without actually having to modify the original implementation, all from a coding perspective with that. And like I was more more abstract overloading methods with Bertrand from dealing with Delphi, Robert C. Martin, or as we all know him as Uncle Bob, focusing on more with C++ and about abstracting over, or focus more on using interfaces of define the interface. And then, as we all know with interfaces, we can just simply go through and implement the interface. And instead of having to inherit directly from that, we can use more composition when passing around the interface, and depending on the actual implementation, we get slightly different results out of it. And that's what, as we deal with C++, that's what we more focus, how I more utilize it is actually utilizing interfaces to implement the functionality. Next. So overall, what is it good for really? We can talk about, yes, the principle of having something open for extension, closed for modification, but what's it really good for? How does it work? For me, it's more about continuing to have working code, working code that continues to work. I probably could have had a better phrase for that. But ultimately, with the way I like to use it, is just that when I go through do that first basic implementation to do a search or to get what the default search configuration may be, is when I'm done with that, when I come back because now we have a new modification to do to a search for a different provider because they have more data points to search on, or they just operate at a different level, I know I can go through, take the interface or extract the interface if I didn't take the time to make one the first time around, and implement it specifically for this new provider or this new use case that happens to I keep using search configuration because this is one of the first times I really applied this principle. But I can get away with just adding in new code. I may or may not have unit tests on the original one and how it works. When I come around to get what the new search configuration is I can just add in new code. I don't have to worry about going in, throwing in an if statement, checking all this, or to make sure, okay, I'm checking various permissions or feature flippers to ensure what I get out of it is going to continue work. I can just go implement new interface, get what I need out of it, write some tests around it, make sure it works as is expected, and I can go out to production with it ultimately. And if something doesn't happen to work with it, and with it being wrapped in a feature flipper or permission, it's just as simple as turning it off and it falling back to the old way of working. So to me, it's great, especially when moving quickly in agile type environments, having to go through and move fast and not break things. The other piece for it is it helps reduce the complexity by actually having those interfaces in there, and don't need to do all those if statements and permission checks in one spot of code just to try to figure out what's going on. I can document the class, go, hey, this is for this use case. Okay, I know how this works and what it's going to do. But in the end, things are all great and all, and sometimes as much as you want to, you can't follow the principle. It's code, it's your business logic. You may have to kind of ignore the principle and break your code. Actually go back onto that original implementation, that class, that method that we were trying to keep closed for modifications, and modify it. Business rules change, we have to change too. Now, with that also is, nothing can ever be 100% closed. But in the end, more of my interpretation of it is ultimately the way I like to treat it. If it works, don't break it. Even if I'm coming into someone else's code where we have to implement some new business logic, is try to keep it working as is, especially when you're dealing with some legacy code and legacy code that's been around and may not be written the best. It's kind of dangerous sometimes to go through and modify. You never know where it's going to be referenced, but attempt to not break it. I can test the new changes. Oh, and yeah, that's the other part of it. Sorry, referring to my notes. Or you do have something, you're looking at how it works, and it may or may not have tests. So that's the other reason why you can't actually go through and modify it, is you are unsure, you don't have a good safety net of what it does and whether or not you will break it by modifying said code. You can always go the route of implementing your own unit tests around it to try to handle and ensure that code you're working, that legacy piece of code you're working with doesn't break. So you can go through modified add-if statements, whatever logic you need to apply there, and update your unit tests to make sure that your new use cases work while keeping the existing functionality available. Also with this here, for my interpretation, is I'd like to focus on smaller units of work, smaller classes, smaller interfaces where I know business logic would change. Just with my experience with within my current company, with just the way we operate, it's just focusing on what it needs to do and kind of following that what's it called, YAGNI. You ain't gonna need it. So instead of trying to plan for the future of, I know we're going to have do something dynamic the first go around, I know we have a targeted third-party user where we know exactly how we want it to work for them. So instead of worrying about, oh, but what if they want to change, what if someone else wants to use it in this way or that way? Don't worry about it. Let's just, we may need it, we may not. So let's just focus in on what we actually know, the exact use case, and implement it for that. And afterwards, we can worry about coming through later and implementing that new need when we actually have the need. Which leads right into the last part that I have here. But yeah, just all about focusing on the current use case and worrying about implementing the functionality later. This was supposed to take me a little bit longer. Then the other part of this here is I've been talking about, the small use cases of when it comes to, actually, I don't know how to go back slide. This one, okay. I've been focusing so far here on just the open close principle from a small perspective as classes, the method, keeping the class itself, the method itself closed for modification, but open for extension. The open close principle actually has more, can apply more than just that your own code itself. We can think of it with real life use cases that you may interact with on a daily basis. One of those can be such as third-party APIs that you interact with. Think about it, in the end, you can't change the way their code, the way their API works. You are given you only have the interface as needed for interacting with it, and they only return results to you in a certain way. Well, right there is a really strict enforcement of the open close principle. Yeah, you can't modify their code or the way it works. What you can do is you can modify what happens when you get those returns, which we all typically deal with. So it's at that higher level, dealing with third-party APIs and interfacing with them. The other part of that is at a high level is more of a plugin type architecture, where you have your hooks that you're basically trying to implement to modify the workflow within it. Can't talk too much more about that because I don't have much experience dealing with plugin type architectures, but that is another use case with it. Ouch. Sorry. Well, with that, any questions so far before we jump into some code examples and actually work on some code examples on the fly? All right, then let me Zoom does this one's PHP code. So with this is what I have going on here so far. And actually, before I continue, can everyone actually see it okay, or do I need to resize?
Maybe bump it up a little.
How's that? Or should I just do the good old fashioned, what, Control Plus?
I think that's good, but anybody else?
All right, got a thumbs up.
No, that was much better. Thank you.
Okay. With this here is my use case for it is search configurations. We deal with within Salukra, we deal with searches on what is a guarantor and patients. We can search guarantor. One guarantor can have multiple patients. One patient has one guarantor. So it's a basic hierarchy. But we can search on data by either one. So for the most part, we need to do a basic search. This is how I would go about actually doing a quick implementation with a little bit of pseudocode in here and some working examples. Is I would go through first time through for the search configuration and actually go through and hard code it for whatever the configuration needs to be. So whatever search parameters I'm given, I can then go through, validate the search parameters to ensure that I received ones that are needed from the front end, and to then go ahead and actually execute the search using those search parameters against the database. And also same thing with the configuration, we do send that out to the front end so that they can actually go through and determine what fields that need to be displayed to the end user in order to do some sort of lookup to find their current available balances. So first time through, we're gonna remember my shortcuts. We're gonna have basically a hard-coded search is on what they're gonna search by, and in this case, it's simple as the guarantor last name and a postal code. I am so used to a Mac. So in the end, it would get the configurations. You would then, once you have your search configurations, you would go through, do the logic to validate the search parameters that you did receive. I just did a simple one for now. I apologize, none of this is actually working code. Pass in some parameters, and what we would like to do then is to go through and ultimately check that the parameters that we do have against the configs, the search configurations as we are expecting it, and to see if we have everything before we would go through an attempt. And then it in the end would return the results as long as we have everything, execute the search with the given parameters to get a results, and then kick it back out to the front end, display whatever it may be. With this, so once this is done, it's out in production. We know, hey, yes, excellent. This works with the guarantor's last name and their postal code. Okay, now we get to the instance where we need to go through and we want it to be configured. We want a different one to search by patient information instead. Well, luckily with PHP Storm, since we don't have some sort of interface here going on with the guarantor information, we can go through extract the interface, because this is the only thing that really needs to change is what our configuration is from the guarantor level. And let's go ahead and update it to all be patient. So with this here, go ahead, refactor. And PHP Storm makes it really easy to go through, refactor, extract an interface. Face and that's a new one. Get our interface, get what we want out of it, and then back in the index. It's still doing this, but ultimately right now we still have our original search configuration in here, and we really need a way of getting it out. Ideally, you'd probably have a permission that would flip between patient, to enable searching by patient permissions. At this time, what I like to do is actually go through and create a factory. Factory, I can type.
Typo alert. Said seach, not search.
Of course, thank you. Come on, rename to search config. Our function. Config. And we want it to return the search config interface. Go through, implement it. And if we follow some good kind of refactoring principles, if you don't have unit tests, is let's go ahead and let's let it return what we originally expect. The, what do I call it? Configuration index. Configuration, yes. Factory. Get our new search config factory and just clean that up. And then ultimately this here now is just simply going to be factory config, and it would return our sysconfig, and this was all working code. Everything would continue to work the same. Now we can go through and just for example, public function construct. Now this is what I like to do, just may not be the correct way, but simply would like to pass in the permissions or things that are going to affect what it will ultimately would be to get the config. And of course, usually these involve database connections, so passing in the database connections that would be used for any of our implementations. I like to pass in through the constructor. DB interfaces. Pass in database information, and then also pass in some sort of either pass in the actual, if you can at this time, pass in the permission or feature flipper at this time, or may make more sense to do it actually within the git config, because that's instead of having it at the time of construction of the factory itself, it may be something you may have down in the config. But ultimately, permission flag. It's a flag I can spell. Click name. We want this. It has search. And then we know that down in here, if just very simple use case, but if that's patient search, and go through and just simply pass back the implementation that gives us our patient search one. And let's go through, because we know this works. Let me dig back into this. Sometimes it's good to come back through and refactor the name of this guy to be something that makes a little bit more sense. So for this one, I'm just going to come back through and refactor the name to be the guarantor search. Luckily, having something such as PHP Storm for doing some of this refactoring work works out great. If you don't have it nor used it, I highly recommend trying to giving it a test run. I don't use much VS Code myself, but I know that's another very popular one, and I'm sure you can do it, but there's just a lot of plugins you probably have to go through, add in, configure. But once we have this one refactored, hey, this is going to continue working the way we expect to, is now we just need a simple implementation of the patient version. And I want to make a new PHP class of and implements the only interface we have available right now. Yeah, I'll add that. And then we know we need to return an array of, I can't even remember, the search key enumeration. Search key, and we want the patient information instead. Patient last name. And where's the postal code? And go back through, update set factory to return this instead. And then if we were to, let's, oh, page P8 would be, wait, I am on 8. I don't remember the noise for PHP 8 to do this automatically for me, so I do it the hard way. And then it'd just be as simple as whatever it takes for the logic to pass back. Just for example purposes, pass in the feature the permission flipper, feature flipper, permission, to enable patient search, and in the end, this would return the patient search. And if we had some logic up and through here, it would actually go through, validate that, hey, this was the guarantor that we received, not the patient, and handle errors accordingly. But in a nutshell, this is the open close principle, the way I understand it and interpret it, and the way I actually use it on a daily basis. In the future, no matter how complex it gets on different permissions, to say, okay, next iteration on this may be, we don't want to have to come through and hard code this every time between patient or guarantor. Maybe we have a mix of them. So the next iteration to this would look something along the lines of creating the database tables to support some database driven search configuration. And then you would implement the same search configuration for the get to go through and get it out of the database instead. And then, but that's only piece you'd have to go through and implement is the database specific one to re-implement this interface. And then your logic in your factory just is you pass in the permissions to help determine which one you need out of it. And in the end, this get config is just going to return that new implementation when you have the appropriate permissions enabled. And then in the end, what this will look like is now instead of having this doing all your checks for has patient search or has database configuration, override with database configuration being somewhere in line with your normal controller code of trying to piece that all together, or even having it in one single search configuration type class where you're just trying to figure out how this search works and why. It's broken out across the multiple classes, but having this factory really just helps you see, okay, what am I getting out of it? Oh, here's the only way it will work if has patient search is enabled. Okay, it will return this, and I see how exactly that exact implementation works. And I see some questions coming up in chat dealing with the eloquent enumeration. I'll touch upon that in a sec. At this point, though, any questions? I think I can go back to this. But that's the general gist of my presentation here on the open close principle. I can reach me via my email address. I don't really do Twitter much. Sometimes I'm in the AZ Slack. Sometimes I'm not. I'm very bad about that one because I only use AZ Dev Slack for the AZ Devs.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray.
Yes, thank you. I just said that, but I was still muted.
No. When we hop back over to the enumeration.
Yeah. Let's see that real quick. I'm not sure which abstraction you're using.
So I'm using the eloquent enumeration package.
Yep, that's the one I linked in the chat.
Yeah. So what I do with this one and way I utilize it is I use the PHP doc block hack essentially. So
Same.
I get the auto completions for it. And because when you use the method version of it, it returns the actual implementation of the class. So that's the use case for having the parentheses, I think was
Yeah, it just makes it, and it's an easy way to get an instance of that enumeration. There's also methods for getting an instance of it based off of the key or the value. You can do like search key, : member by key, and then you could provide the constant name as a string there, or you could do member by value.
Interesting. Never seen this
And
before.
you could also get the entire list of instances by doing search key : members. And that'll give you an array back of all of the values.
Gotcha. Cool.
There we go. I assume the code didn't show up in the screen share.
Yeah, I can see him.
Okay. Yeah, until PHP 8.1 with enumerations is available, I'm using this guy.
Gotcha. It's just a user land enumeration package. I get
Exactly.
see,
Yeah. Not to be confused with, because we do use Laravel somewhat with some of our newer services just for their routing and API interface, is I'll say, okay, that use the eloquent enumeration, but I always have to specify not Laravel's eloquent. It's a
Right. Yeah.
funny coincidence that the names are the same.
Yep. So one of the great ways of using this type of abstraction is you can pass in you can do a property type for a method parameter and say you expect an instance of search key. And you always know it's going to be that. It's going to be one of those constants or instances of a search key. This way you can get away from doing strings for everything that you pass to your methods.
Right.
It really hardens your code.
How do you just maybe going a little too deep here? How do you define a how does that syntax work? Where it's like it looks like a constant with the parentheses. How does it what under the hood? How does that get accessed?
That's magic methods.
Okay, it's just magic methods. Okay.
Yeah. Too much magic for most IDEs and editors, hence the annotations.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah, it definitely makes code so much easier to use.
Yep. And you can get pretty complex with these things too. You can do kind of value objects as well. So you can do and extends. There's another one that's not abstract enumeration, but it's like abstract multi-ton or something, which I don't remember exactly what it means, but essentially at that point you're doing keys to possibly structures or arrays or something like that. So it's an interesting way of doing keys to whatever you need.
Yeah, I haven't used it for that. I just try to keep it simple. I haven't had a problem that required that yet.
Yep. Well,
Stop the share.
if no one has any other questions about solid principles, I'm going to stop recording.
I'd say there is some dependency in, well, a lot of solid principle. Trying to show one solid principle off tends to show off multiple solid principles. With here, I'm also trying to, follow the, I'm blanking on it now. What's the S again? Single responsibility principle.
Yeah.
One
Yep.
thing, make it do one thing and one thing only, essentially. Obviously, that's how I have it all broken out, is to follow that. I can't pronounce his name. The
Let's
Liskov.
go.
Liskov's substitution principle, obviously with the interface and just being able to swap any one of them out, is another good use. Another one of the solid principles here. This method is only this class, and this method for these interfaces is expected to do this one thing, and you can just freely swap them out. That's how your old implementation will continue to work. Your new one will, once you work the bugs out, will also work, but without breaking anything else. Not supposed to break anything else. Trying to think. Yeah, I'm blanking on the rest of them now, of course. It's been a long day.
I just posted a link to an article with a bunch of nice PHP examples for all the solid stuff.
Nice.
And Jeremy's not here, so I could give him a shout out. He's the one made me really want to dig down into it even further since just PHP with his awesome presentation on Solid. So, but this, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure we got that one recorded.
Yeah, great presentation on Solid. Even got like it sound and shows some more real business use cases for the way he implemented it. The other one thing I forgot to make mention of is, well, I kind of talked about it a little bit, but the way I like to use this is for those times when I have product come to me and say, we need this working, we need this to work now. That's when I can allow it to focus in on just this one thing, the specific implementation, and go through and do it and sell them on, even though that they know that, hey, we want to go through and we're going to change this later and have it work dynamically. But to go back through and be like, look, if we go through and do it dynamically now, it's going to take a long time to get this done and out the door. You need it done this way. Here, I got your back. We'll get this done now, and we'll get it working the way we want it to work for this one use case. Then we'll come back through and refactor to do the nice dynamic thing that you're asking for. And
Yeah.
Product loves to hear that.
Like you said earlier in your talk, it's like a lot of times people you'll get a feature request and to add this thing, and like the brute force kind of default way of doing it is just to add some if statements to existing code, create more branches, more like flows that, like in this case it'll do what it used to do, in this case it'll do the new thing. But by implementing good open code principles and Solid in general, it can be as easy as to add a new feature, you add a new class, and now you've got a new feature. That new feature is isolated to its own class. And it just works, and you never had to touch any of the old code. It's beautiful. It's great.
It keeps things nice and separated. You can test it by itself. Your static analysis won't complain at you.
But it's a good way to help out product a lot. Product, I know, loves to hear that.
All right, I'm gonna stop recording.